My name is Hannah Cooper. I am 29, and for years I thought being the dependable one in my family would finally earn me a place at the table. I paid the bills, I kept the lights on, I even saved my father's life when insurance fell short. But no matter how much I gave, it was never enough. One winter night the phone rang, and instead of thanks, I was told I had to beg my sister for forgiveness, or be cast out for good. And when laughter followed in the background, I realized I wasn't their daughter or their sister anymore. I was just the wallet they could discard. What happens when the one who has always carried the weight finally decides to put it down? Stay with me, because this story will show you. Let me take you back to where it began. The night my phone rang, I was sitting in my small apartment in Lakeview, East Chicago, trying to unwind after another long day at Midwest Freight Systems. I had just reheated leftover pasta and settled into the couch when the screen lit up with my mother's name. For a second, I considered letting it go to voicemail. Calls from her rarely meant anything good, but habit won out, and I swiped to answer. Her voice came through, clipped and cold, sharper than the winter wind rattling my windows. Hannah, if you do not get down on your knees and beg your sister for forgiveness, you are no longer part of this family. I froze, the fork slipping from my hand and clattering against the plate. I could hear music in the background, glasses clinking, a burst of laughter. My mother was not alone. She was surrounded by people celebrating, and I was on the outside. I opened my mouth, but before I could respond, another voice rang out, smug and familiar. Emily. She laughed carefree, as if the whole thing were a joke. She will not survive without us. My chest tightened. The words cut deeper than I expected, though part of me knew I should not be surprised. I pressed the phone tighter to my ear, waiting for my mother to explain, to soften, to say anything that might ease the blow. Nothing came. The silence stretched, broken only by the muffled cheer of a toast in the background. I pictured my parents at Emily's side, smiling, lifting their glasses, while I sat in my one bedroom with a cracked radiator and a tired body. I finally managed to whisper, "Mom, what are you saying?" Her reply was quick, almost impatient. "You heard me. Apologize, beg if you have to. Until then, you are out." The words hung in the air, heavy and final. I felt my throat tighten. My mind scrambled through memories, every bill I had covered, every rent payment I had fronted for Emily, every doctor's visit I had paid for when my father's insurance fell short. All of it seemed to vanish in that moment, erased with one demand: beg for forgiveness. I wanted to shout, to list every sacrifice, but I knew it would not matter. They had already chosen their side, and it was not mine. The laughter on the other end swelled again. I could almost see Emily tossing her hair back, relishing her triumph. My father's voice floated faintly in the background, too blurred to make out, but it did not matter. He was there, and he was silent. That silence cut deeper than my mother's words. At least she had spoken. He simply let it happen. I pressed the heel of my hand against my forehead, trying to steady the rush of heat building inside me. The pasta on my plate was growing cold, untouched. I stared at the faint reflection of myself in the black television screen across the room. My shoulders slumped, my eyes hollow like a ghost in my own life. The phone pressed against my ear felt heavier than it should. Finally, my mother's voice came again, sharp, but quiet, as if she had stepped away from the noise. "Think about it, Hannah. Do what is right." Her tone almost softened, but not enough to matter. Then the line went dead. I held the phone against my cheek a moment longer before lowering it onto the table. My hands trembled against my knees. The room around me was silent, except for the hum of the old radiator. Outside, traffic moved along Sheridan Road, muffled by the wind. Inside, my thoughts ricocheted. Beg for forgiveness. Out of the family. Emily's mocking laugh. My father's silence. I sat still, breathing shallowly, until the sounds outside faded into a dull blur. I leaned back on the couch and closed my eyes, but the words replayed on a loop, each one sharper than the last. For years I had told myself that if I gave enough, paid enough, carried enough, one day they would see me. One day they would call me daughter, sister, with the same warmth they reserved for Emily. Tonight I realized I was not their daughter. I was not their sister. I was only their wallet, and now even that was not enough. I stayed there staring at the ceiling, the dim light of the kitchen bulb flickering. My breath came slow and uneven. Somewhere in the building, a neighbor's television laughed canned laughter at a sitcom joke. Life went on as usual, but something inside me had shifted. What had once been hope had hardened into something else, something sharper. The fork still lay on the plate, cold pasta untouched. My phone sat dark and silent on the table, but I knew it would not stay that way for long. I closed my eyes again and let the sting of their words settle into my bones. This was not just a fight. This was the line they had drawn. And maybe for the first time I was ready to draw one of my own. I remembered being 10 years old in Naperville when the school gym was packed with parents and teachers handing out awards. The air smelled of popcorn from the concession stand, and folding chairs squeaked as people shuffled to sit. My sister Emily had just finished 6th grade and was called on stage with her long blonde hair tied neatly back, her smile flashing under the lights like she was a movie star. Mom and Dad clapped as if she had been crowned Queen of Illinois. When the principal shook her hand and handed her a certificate, my parents leapt to their feet, snapping pictures, beaming with pride. I sat 2 rows back with a wilted bouquet of dandelions I had picked from the schoolyard. I clutched them so tightly the stems bent in my fist. When it was my turn, I got a small ribbon for spelling first place in the district. I walked across that same stage, heart-pounding cheeks, hot, hoping for a glance, a smile, anything. I held up the ribbon as I passed my parents. Dad ruffled my hair once and muttered, "Good job, kiddo," before turning back to watch Emily climb onto her new bike outside for photos. Purple, shiny, with a white basket, the kind of bike I had dreamed of. I stood there with my dandelions and tried to believe I mattered. Summers always had their rhythm. Emily went to camp in Wisconsin, canoeing, horseback riding, writing postcards about roasted marshmallows. Mom packed her trunk with snacks and sunscreen and little notes tucked in her clothes. I stayed behind in Naperville with chores. Mow the lawn, fold laundry, keep an eye on the house. "You are the responsible one," Mom would say, handing me a list while she fussed over Emily's departure. I would stand at the sink scrubbing dishes, listening to the neighbor's mower hum, imagining Emily's laughter around a campfire. At night I lay in bed, staring at the glow in the dark stars, stuck on my ceiling, whispering, spelling words under my breath, and clutching that ribbon like a secret no one else cared about. Family parties told the same story. At Uncle Tom's retirement party, the dining room crowded with relatives and clinking glasses, Dad raised his wine and toasted to Emily being accepted into the advanced math program. Everyone applauded, nodding, smiling at her as if she were destined to solve world hunger. I had been waiting all night to tell them I had won first place in the regional spelling bee, something I had worked for months. I opened my mouth, but before I got halfway through, Cousin Kelly asked Emily about her new extracurricular class. The room shifted instantly, attention sliding off me like watered-down glass. I sat back, cheeks burning, words trapped in my throat. I learned to swallow those moments, to fade into the wallpaper. By high school, the pattern was carved in stone. Emily had volleyball games, cheer competitions, debate tournaments. Dad wore his suit. Mom waved her camcorder. The family cheered. I had choir solos and science fair projects that came and went without mention. I would walk off stage, scanning the crowd, searching for their faces, but their eyes were always turned to Emily. One spring I came home from an honors ceremony with a certificate tucked under my arm. Mom was ironing Emily's prom dress in the dining room. I held up the paper, waiting for her smile. She glanced, said, "Honey, put that on the fridge," and went back to adjusting the hem. My achievement disappeared under layers of Emily's college brochures and invitations already pinned there. The memory that stung most came later that summer when I overheard Mom chatting with a neighbor on the porch. "Emily is our pride and joy, so talented, so full of promise. Hannah is sweet, of course, but Emily is special." I froze in the hallway, the words carving into me like glass. Sweet, that was my role. Sweet and dependable. Not brilliant, not dazzling, not unforgettable. Just the one who kept things running while Emily shined. Even as an adult, those moments lived inside me. Sitting in my apartment after that phone call, I realized nothing had changed. The sound of laughter behind my mother's words, Emily's smug tone, Dad's silence, it was the same script I had been living since childhood. I was expected to carry the weight, to disappear quietly when my presence threatened the spotlight. For years I believed if I gave enough, they would see me. But the truth was carved long ago. Emily was special. I was sweet. And sweet was never enough. I thought about the girl I had been clutching her ribbon in the dark, praying for her parents' eyes to find her. She learned quickly that attention was not coming. Each overlooked moment etched a deeper scar. That night in Chicago after the phone call, I felt the old scar pulse again, only this time it did not feel like a wound. It felt like a warning, a reminder of what silence had cost me. I stood and walked to the small window that overlooked Sheridan Road. Snow flurries were starting to fall, swirling under the streetlights. Cars passed with headlights casting streaks of white against the glass. I pressed my palm to the cold pane and let the chill seep into my skin. For the first time, I did not imagine my parents' eyes turning toward me. I imagined turning my own back. The thought was terrifying and strangely freeing. If I stopped trying to earn their love, what would I lose that I had not already lost? I let out a long breath, shoulders heavy, and stepped away from the window. The apartment was still, the radiator hissing softly. On the counter sat a stack of unopened mail, mostly bills, reminders of the life I was already holding together on my own. I thought of the sacrifices I had made, the money I had poured into keeping my parents comfortable and Emily afloat. I thought of how none of it had earned me a place at that family table. Maybe it was time to stop paying for a seat that was never mine. The snow outside thickened, flakes spinning wildly. I pulled the blanket from the couch and wrapped it around myself, curling into the armchair by the window. I let the memories roll through me, not fighting them, just letting them show me what I had tried so hard to ignore. I was not forgotten. I was erased. And the only way to change that was to stop letting them hold the eraser. The clock on the wall ticked past midnight. I closed my eyes, the blanket pulled tight, the hum of the city distant. Sleep did not come easily, but when it did, it carried with it the faintest trace of resolve, something new and unfamiliar. It was small, but it was there, and it was mine. I woke up to the thin gray light of a Chicago morning slipping through the blinds, the radiator clanking as it struggled against the cold. My head felt heavy, but I forced myself to the kitchen table and opened my laptop. The glow from the screen lit the small room, catching on the stack of envelopes I had been avoiding. I clicked open my bank account, and the numbers blinked back at me. Not much, but enough to remind me of how hard I had worked for every dollar. I thought of 2021 when the phone rang just past midnight at work. My mother's voice was breaking, words tumbling between sobs. "Your father is in surgery. They said insurance will not cover everything. Hannah, what are we going to do?" I sat there in the empty office, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, staring at the total she gave me. $18,000. Insurance would pay 10. That left 8. My savings at the time were just over 8,000. I had built it dollar by dollar, cutting corners, skipping vacations, packing leftovers for lunch, while others ordered takeout. That night, I wired the money without hesitation. I typed the numbers slowly, hands trembling, feeling like I was pouring my future into a void. They never asked how long it had taken to save that money. They never asked what I had given up. Mom just said thank God and hung up to rush back to the hospital. I sat at my desk with the screen still glowing, my chest hollow. That was family, I told myself. You step up, you sacrifice. It did not stop there. When Dad came home, bills kept piling up. One afternoon, Mom called saying the utilities were overdue again. It would be easier if everything were under your name, she said. You are organized. That is how I became the name on the electricity, the water, the internet. Every month, like clockwork, $250, sometimes more when the Chicago winter bit deep. 4 years of it. Over $12,000 spent, never once reimbursed, never once even acknowledged. And then there was Emily. She had a knack for calling at the worst times always, with her voice trembling just enough to sound desperate. Han, can you spot me? 500 rent is due. I swear I will pay you back next week. The first time I believed her, I sent the money clinging to the hope that she would follow through. A week later, she called again, short on her credit card, this time 700. Then came 300 for a last-minute flight. 900 for rent when she overspent on clothes, 600 for car repairs. Each time it was the same promise. Next week I will pay you back. Her Instagram always told a different story though. Cocktails on rooftops, manicures, vacations in Florida, with fruity drinks lined up on a table. One night, I sat at the kitchen table with receipts spread out, my calculator blinking under the dim lamp. 8,000 for dad's surgery, 12,000 for utilities, 17,800 for Emily's emergencies. The total glared up at me. $45,800. My breath caught my hands cold on the table. That was a down payment on a condo. That was half my student loans. That was freedom. Instead, it was gone, evaporated into bills and cocktails and silence. I wanted to call them right then to demand they see me, but I knew how it would go. Mom would say I was making a big deal out of nothing. Dad would retreat into silence. Emily would roll her eyes and call me dramatic. So I stacked the papers, neatly slid them into a folder, and tucked it away. But the number burned in my mind. 45,800. The price of being dependable, the cost of being invisible. I leaned back in my chair that night, staring at the folder, my chest tight. The radiator hissed in the corner, snow tapping lightly against the window pane. I pressed my palms flat against the table as if holding myself in place. For years I had told myself that helping them was love, that sacrifice was duty. But in that moment, staring at the total, I saw it for what it was. A ledger with my name on every line, and theirs on none. I pushed away from the table, stood and walked to the window. The streetlights cast long shadows on the snow. A bus rumbled by, passengers bundled in coats, their faces turned down. Ordinary people heading home, carrying their own burdens. And here I was, carrying mine and theirs. My reflection in the glass looked pale, eyes ringed with exhaustion. I whispered the number under my breath, the syllables sharp. 45,800. Saying it aloud made it heavier, somehow more real. I touched the cold glass, breathing slow, and realized something I had never allowed myself to think. If I stopped paying, if I stopped covering, if I stopped saving them, the world would not end. Maybe it would only be their world. The thought scared me, but it also sparked something deep in my chest. A small flicker of anger, steady and warm, like an ember refusing to die. I turned back to the table where the folder sat, its edges sticking out from the pile of unopened mail. I did not open it again. I just stood there staring at it, letting the weight of it settle over me. I switched off the light and walked slowly to the bedroom. The sheets were cold when I slid under them, the city sounds drifting faintly through the cracked window. I closed my eyes and let the hum of the heater fill the silence. That number echoed in my head, not as a wound this time, but as a warning. Sleep came late, carrying me into dreams where I was always reaching for something just out of grasp. When I woke, the sun was weak, casting a dull glow over the snow outside. I lay still a long while, listening to the muted world around me. The folder was still on the table, waiting like a shadow I could not escape. And I knew, sooner or later, I would have to decide what to do with it. Thanksgiving arrived cold and gray, the kind of day where the air seemed to hang heavy with the smell of chimney smoke and damp leaves. I drove my old Honda Civic from Chicago to Naperville, the muffler rattling as I pulled into the driveway I had known since childhood. A pie from a bakery sat on the passenger seat, still warm in its box, the closest thing I could manage to bringing something festive. I parked beside the familiar brick house and stepped out, the chill biting at my cheeks. Before I even reached the front door, headlights swept across the driveway. A silver Lexus rolled in sleek and spotless, and Emily stepped out, her blonde hair catching the porch light like she had planned it that way. Daniel followed, holding the door for her as if she were royalty. Voices erupted from inside. An uncle whistled, someone clapped, my mother nearly tripped down the steps in her rush to greet them. "Look at that car, you really treat her right," one relative called, patting Daniel on the back. I stood there with my bakery pie in both hands, invisible, as the crowd formed around Emily and her shiny arrival. Inside, the dining room stretched long, the table covered with a cream cloth and candles flickering down the center. Plates and silverware sparkled under the chandelier. At one end, Emily's chair was dressed with a small bouquet of yellow flowers tied neatly to the back. My seat further down the line was bare, the cushion frayed at the corner. I placed the pie on the sideboard and slipped quietly into my spot. Conversation spun easily in Emily's direction. "Tell us about the wedding plans." Aunt Carol leaned across the table, her pearls gleaming in the light. "Have you chosen the flowers yet? Where will the honeymoon be?" Emily laughed, tossing her hair. "Maui, we think. Daniel's parents might even help with the resort." The table erupted in admiration. "Maui, how perfect. Of course they will. You deserve it." I sipped my water, throat dry. I wanted to mention that I had been promoted just a month ago at Midwest Freight Systems, trusted with larger accounts, but every time I opened my mouth, the subject curved back to Emily. Her centerpieces, her dress, her Lexus. I chewed a bite of turkey that tastes like sawdust in my mouth. At one point, Aunt Carol chuckled and turned to me with a smile that held more pity than kindness. "At least you are good with numbers, Hannah. Not everyone has that skill. Someone has to be practical." The table laughed lightly, not cruel exactly, but careless in a way that stung deeper. I forced a smile, nodding, cheeks burning. "Yeah, someone has to be." Dinner moved on. Turkey and stuffing mashed potatoes passed around, cranberry sauce glistening in bowls. Daniel shared a story about buying the Lexus, how Emily deserved an upgrade. Glasses lifted in another toast. Dad raised his wine face, flushed with pride. "To Emily, our shining star." Glasses clinked, voices rose. Emily beamed, cheeks glowing. I stared down at my plate, fork pressed tight between my fingers. The sound of their laughter echoed sharp in my ears. For years I had swallowed the small slights, told myself they did not matter, but something inside me shifted as I sat there. I wanted to stand up and shout that I had saved Dad's life with $8,000 he never asked about, that I had been paying their bills every month while Emily posed beside her car. But the words clogged my throat, heavy, unspoken. I forced myself to swallow the lump rising in my chest. The flowers on Emily's chair seemed to mock me, bright yellow against the dark wood, while my chair sat plain, unadorned. I pushed pie around my plate without tasting it, each bite heavier than the last. The room blurred with chatter and laughter, until all I could hear was the steady drum of my heartbeat. When dessert came, pumpkin pie and apple crisp, I barely touched mine. My thoughts roared louder than the voices around me. Anger stirred hot and undeniable. Not tucked away in some hidden corner, but pulsing openly, demanding to be felt. It was not the sharp flare of a moment. It was years of neglect and silence pressing forward all at once. Later, when the dishes were cleared and coats were pulled from the closet, I carried my empty pie tin out to the Civic. Emily's Lexus gleamed under the porch lights, Daniel holding the door, as she slipped inside, laughter following her. I slid behind the wheel of my car, the seat worn thin, the engine sputtering as I turned the key. As I pulled away from the curb, the houses along the street glowed with strings of holiday lights already strung up. My chest-burned jaw clenched tight. The image of that table with flowers tied to Emily's chair would not leave me. For the first time, it was not sadness that filled me, it was fury. It pushed against my ribs, heavy and insistent. I gripped the wheel harder, the road stretching dark and empty ahead, and I knew something inside me had cracked open. The following week at work, I buried myself in spreadsheets, numbers stacked in endless columns that blurred together until my eyes ached. I told myself keeping busy would help quiet the buzzing in my head, but it only made me more tired. I stayed late almost every night at Midwest Freight Systems, the office nearly empty by the time I shut down my computer. One Tuesday morning, Grace Miller stopped by my cubicle. She was my manager, a tall woman in her mid-40s with sharp eyes and a calm presence that carried more weight than any lecture. She stood by my desk watching me type furiously. "Hannah," she said softly, "let's take a break. Come with me." I hesitated, my hands still moving over the keyboard. Deadlines loomed, and the stack of reports felt like it was swallowing me whole. But Grace gave me a look that told me no excuse would hold. I sighed, grabbed my coat, and followed her out into the cold air. We walked 2 blocks to a small cafe tucked between a dry cleaner and a bookstore. Inside, it was warm and smelled of cinnamon. Grace ordered a cappuccino, and I asked for plain black coffee, the cheapest thing on the menu. We sat by the window where frost lined the glass. She studied me as I wrapped my hands around the warm cup. "You look like you are carrying the weight of the world," she said. I laughed, thin and tired, trying to brush it off. "Just busy, that is all." Her eyes did not waver. "I have been in this field long enough to know when someone is running on empty. You take on too much. Not just here. Everywhere." Her words stung because they were true. I dropped my gaze, watching the steam curl from the coffee. "Can I tell you something?" she asked. I nodded. "Boundaries are not cruelty," she said slowly. "They are love with a backbone. Without them you will break, and you will keep enabling people who should stand on their own." The sentence landed heavier than I expected. I tried to smile, but it faltered. "I will keep that in mind," I murmured. She leaned back, sipping her cappuccino, giving me the space to let it sink in. Later that week, I was in the break room when I overheard a group of colleagues talking by the coffee pot. "Did you hear Mark got into Booth?" one of them said, pouring sugar into his cup. "He is starting part-time this fall." "Booth," I repeated under my breath. Another coworker nodded. "Yeah, University of Chicago Booth. Tough program, but incredible if you want to grow your career. Honestly, you would be perfect for it, Hannah. You are sharp. You have the discipline." I forced a laugh, waving it off. "Me? I do not know. That is expensive, competitive." But their words planted a seed I could not shake. That night I sat on my couch with my laptop glowing in the dim living room. I typed University of Chicago Booth MBA into the search bar. The website loaded full of photos of students in suits working in modern classrooms, overlooking the skyline. Words like leadership, transformation, future jumped from the screen. My heart pounded with a strange mix of fear and longing. For years, every extra dollar I had went to my parents, to Emily, to patch holes in lives that were not mine. I had never dared to imagine something just for me. Now the idea of walking into those classrooms, of building a future that belonged only to me, felt both impossible and intoxicating. I leaned back, staring at the city lights outside the window. For the first time in years, I allowed myself to picture it. Not as a fantasy, but as a door cracked open just wide enough to see the light spilling through. The next day in the hallway, Grace caught my arm. "You think about what I said?" she asked. I nodded slowly. "Yeah, I did." She gave me a kind but steady smile. "Do not wait too long to put yourself first. No one else will do it for you." Her words echoed through me all afternoon as I worked each spreadsheet and email, carrying less weight than it had before. For the first time in a long time, the idea of a different life, one not built entirely around bills and obligations, seemed faintly possible. That night, I pulled up the Booth site again. My fingers hovered over the request information button. My stomach flipped, equal parts fear and hope. If I stopped carrying everyone else, maybe I could carry myself somewhere better. I clicked. The form loaded, blank fields waiting for my name, my email, my future. I sat there with the glow of the screen on my face, my hands trembling slightly on the keys. I did not type yet. I just let myself breathe in the thought, the idea that my life did not have to be defined by how much I could sacrifice. Outside, snow started falling again, the flakes spinning under the streetlights. Inside, my heart beat fast, steady, insistent, as if reminding me I still had time. I pulled the old folder from the cabinet, the one stuffed with receipts, utility statements, and screenshots I had printed out in angry silence. My hands shook as I flipped through the pages, yellow highlighter bleeding across the ugliest numbers. 8,000 for Dad's surgery. 12,000 for utilities. 17,800 for Emily's endless emergencies. The totals glared at me like warning signs. I slid the papers into a fresh binder blue plastic I had picked up at Walgreens. On the front, I scrawled in black marker uneven letters leaning against each other. What I have done and what I will no longer do. I stared at the words heart-thudding, then pressed the cap back on the marker with a snap. It looked childish, but it was mine, and for once it felt like something that belonged to me. The next day I carried the binder in my bag as I walked through downtown Chicago. Wind whipped sharp across Michigan Avenue, biting at my cheeks as I made my way toward the bank. The Chase branch was warm inside, carpet smell mixing with the faint tang of ink. A young teller with neatly combed hair looked up as I approached the counter. "I need to check on an account," I said, sliding my ID across the desk. He typed quickly, his eyes scanning the screen. "This is a joint retirement account with Robert and Linda Cooper, correct?" My pulse raced, but I nodded. "Yes." He looked up, professional but hesitant. "Are you authorized to make withdrawals?" I swallowed hard, my voice steadier than I felt. "Yes, I am." A moment later, he pushed a form across the counter. "Once you sign this, funds can be released to you." I held the pen tightly, my signature jerky but firm. The weight of it made my palms sweat. He gathered the paperwork, nodding politely. "Would you like a cashier's check or direct deposit?" I took a breath, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. "Direct deposit, please." Walking out of the bank, I pulled my coat tighter, the air sharper than before. My bag felt heavier, though there was nothing inside but the binder. I imagined Emily at a boutique, arms full of dresses, swiping her card with her usual careless smile, only to see declined flash across the screen. The image sent a rush through me, part fear, part relief. I stopped at a coffee shop on the corner, ordered the cheapest drip they had, and sat by the window watching snow blow down the street. My phone buzzed with a text from Emily. "Han, can you cover my rent this month, promise? I will pay you back." I stared at the words until they blurred, then slid the phone face down on the table. Not this time. That evening I called Mark Reynolds, an old friend from college who was now a financial lawyer. He answered with the same calm voice I remembered from study sessions years ago. "Hannah, long time. What is going on?" I hesitated before telling him everything: the binder, the years of bills, the retirement fund. His tone shifted, professional but steady. "If your name is on that account, you are legally entitled to access those funds. You have every right. They cannot force you to keep paying unless you signed a private contract." Hearing it from him felt like someone had untied a knot in my chest. I was not stealing. I was taking back what was already mine. I thanked him, my voice shaking, and we promised to catch up properly another time. When I hung up, I sat in silence at my kitchen table, the binder open in front of me. I traced my finger along the highlighted numbers. Each one, a story of a night I had stayed up late, a paycheck I had stretched thin, a dream I had postponed. My stomach twisted with fear of what would come when they found out, but beneath it pulsed something steadier. Power. The next morning, I stopped by AT&T, my breath fogging in the cold as I stepped inside the bright store. A clerk pulled up the family plan, 4 lines, all under my name. He raised his eyebrows. "You want to split this account?" "Yes," I said. "Keep my line, they will need to open their own." It took nearly an hour of forms, signatures, and confirmation slips. By the time I walked out, the sun had dropped, low orange light spilling over the frozen sidewalks. My hands trembled as I shoved the receipt into my bag, but this time it was not from fear. Back home, I logged into the ComEd portal. Remove payment method. Confirmation. Then Norgas. Then Xfinity. Each time, a new email slid into my inbox, proof that the invisible lifelines I had extended for years were finally severed. When I closed the laptop, the apartment was quiet except for the whistle of wind against the windows. I leaned back in my chair, heart pounding, feeling as if I had just cut ropes that had been holding me underwater. I imagined Emily trying to FaceTime her friends and finding her phone line shut off. I imagined Mom flipping on the light and wondering why the bill had bounced. For once, the consequences were not mine to bear. I shut the binder gently and placed it on the counter. Outside, snow fell steady, blanketing the city in white. I breathed in slowly, deeply, and for the first time in years, the air did not feel heavy. It felt like the start of something different. Something I had almost convinced myself I did not deserve. 2 nights later, my phone lit up with a video call request. The name across the screen made my stomach knot. I almost let it ring out, but some part of me wanted to see their faces. I swiped and the camera filled with my parents' living room, warm light spilling over the familiar furniture. My mother sat on the couch, lips pressed tight, and my father leaned forward in his chair. Emily perched between them, a glass of wine in her hand, eyes glittering like she was waiting for a show. My mother's voice was clipped, every word sharp. "Hannah, enough is enough. If you want to stay part of this family, you need to apologize to your sister. You embarrassed her in front of everyone back in August. You need to beg her forgiveness." My chest tightened, anger rising like heat. Emily leaned closer to the camera, her smile smug. "We all know you will not make it without us. You never could." Her words dripped with confidence, as if the years I had spent paying her rent and covering her mistakes had been erased. I took a slow breath. "I have carried this family," I said, keeping my voice even. "Dad's surgery, the utilities, the phone plans, your credit card bills, Emily. I have paid for all of it. Without me, none of you would be sitting there right now." Mom's face hardened. "Do not twist this. Family helps family. That is what we do. But this is Emily's time, not yours. She deserves her moment without you bringing drama." My father's silence was louder than either of their voices. He sat back, eyes fixed somewhere off camera, jaw tight. He did not defend me. He never did. Emily laughed, the sound sharp in my ears. "You always have to make it about yourself. Poor Hannah the martyr. You are nothing without us." The words hit, but they did not sink the way they once would have. I felt something steady inside me, something that had been building since I printed out those receipts and signed those forms. I leaned forward, staring straight into the camera. "I am not begging. Not this time." For a moment, the call went silent. Emily's smile faltered. My mother's mouth opened, then closed, searching for words. My father shifted, but still said nothing. Mom finally hissed, lowering her voice as if she was afraid the neighbors might hear. "Do you realize what you are doing? If you walk away from this, you are walking away from your family." I let the silence stretch, heart pounding steady, not frantic like before. When I finally spoke, my voice came out calm, almost quiet. "Maybe it is time you see who really cannot live without me." I pressed the red button and the screen went dark. The apartment was silent, except for the faint hum of the heater. My phone buzzed almost immediately with another incoming call. I turned it face down on the table. My hands shook, but it was not from fear. It was release. For the first time, I had not swallowed their words. I had given them back, sharp and clean. I walked to the window, the city lights stretching out across the frozen night. Snow clung to the edges of the glass, glittering in the streetlight glow. My reflection stared back at me, pale but steady, eyes clearer than they had been in years. I whispered it to myself, a vow, a truth I had buried for too long. I am not their wallet anymore. My phone buzzed again, then again, vibrating across the table. I let it ring. The calls would keep coming, but the line had already been drawn. The morning after that call, I woke before sunrise, the apartment still and cold. My binder sat on the kitchen table, its blue cover catching the faint light seeping through the blinds. I ran my fingers over the words I had written there, what I have done and what I will no longer do, and felt a steadiness I had not known before. Today would not be like the others. I bundled myself into my coat and boots, the wind cutting sharp, as I walked down Sheridan Road toward the bus stop. My bag pressed heavy against my shoulder, the binder tucked inside like a weapon. By the time I reached the Chase branch on Michigan Avenue, the city was waking traffic, thickening, people rushing past with coffee cups steaming in their hands. Inside the bank was warm and bright. I approached the counter, my gloves damp from melted snow. The teller recognized me from my visit days before. He looked up politely, ready to proceed. I nodded, sliding my ID and the paperwork toward him. He typed quickly, the clicking of keys filling the silence. Once the transfer was confirmed, he looked at me carefully. "Are you sure about this? These funds will move immediately." My throat tightened, but I forced myself to answer. Yes, do it. He nodded, pressed a button, and the printer whirred, spitting out confirmation slips. He slid them across the counter. The entire retirement fund is now in your name. My hand shook as I signed. When I gathered the papers and tucked them into my binder, the weight felt different. Not guilt, not fear. Power. Leaving the bank, I walked into the icy wind with my scarf pulled tight. Snow crunched beneath my boots. I imagined my parents sipping coffee that morning, still secure in their belief that I would cover everything. They had no idea the safety net had been pulled. I headed next to the AT&T store. The clerk, a young man with a buzz cut, tapped on his tablet. "You want to split this family plan?" he asked, his eyebrows raised. "Yes. Keep my line. They will have to set up their own." It took nearly an hour of paperwork. He slid the final receipt across the counter. "The other lines are inactive as of now." I folded the paper and slipped it into the binder, my pulse quickening at the thought of Emily trying to call her friends and finding her number disconnected. By the time I reached ComEd, the sky had gone gray, snow swirling harder. I logged into the account on a kiosk and removed my card. No payment method on file. Next was Norgas, then Xfinity. Each click, each confirmation email in my inbox cut another cord that had tied me down. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with the binder open, confirmation slips neatly stacked. The radiator hissed in the corner, the smell of reheated soup filling the room. My hands trembled as I laid the papers out, in order, highlighting the totals again. 8,000, 12,000, 17,800, and now 220,000. The numbers glowed like they had been waiting all along to be seen. I pressed my palms flat against the table, feeling the wood cool under my skin. For years I had told myself that silence was survival, that being dependable was my only role. But now silence had turned into something else. It had become a strategy. I was no longer the one patching holes. I was the one pulling the plug. The phone buzzed beside me. Mom, then Emily, then Dad. The screen lit up again and again until I shoved it aside. I could picture them at the kitchen table in Naperville, the house warm and bright, realizing suddenly that the bills were not paid, the phones were cut, the retirement account drained. Their panic would come in waves, and this time I would not be the one to save them. I leaned back, letting the chair creak, staring at the ceiling. Fear still flickered in me, sharp and insistent. What if they came after me, accused me of theft, dragged me into court? The thought made my stomach churn. But I remembered what Mark had said. If your name is on the account, you have the right. You are not obligated to support anyone. I opened my laptop and pulled up his email, reading his words again, steady and firm. Legally, you are in the clear. Emotionally, that was another matter. My hands loosened on the binder, my shoulders easing just slightly. Outside the window, snow blew in heavy gusts, covering the city in white. I thought of Emily smug in her Lexus, laughing at me through the phone. I thought of my mother demanding apologies, my father's silence. For the first time, I felt the weight shift back onto them. It was their turn to carry what I had carried for so long. The clock ticked past midnight. I shut the binder, placed it gently on the counter, and turned off the lamp. The apartment was quiet, the snow falling steady against the glass. I climbed into bed, pulling the blanket tight around my shoulders. Sleep did not come easily, but when it finally did, it was not filled with panic or shame. It was heavy and deep, the kind of sleep I had not known in years. The morning of Emily's wedding arrived gray and bitterly cold. I sat at my kitchen table with a mug of coffee that had already gone cold, staring at my laptop screen. Her wedding website was still open, the kind where you could RSVP, view the registry, even see the seating chart. My name had been erased. Where Hannah Cooper once appeared under family, there was only a blank space, as if I had never existed. Scrolling through Facebook made the knot in my chest tighter. Emily had posted a photo of herself in a silky bridal robe, her hair curled into perfect waves. The caption read, "Family first, always." The comments piled up. Stunning. Daniel is so lucky. You are glowing. But all I could see was the lie in those words. Family first, unless that family was me. I slammed the laptop shut, the sound rattling the table. My apartment felt smaller than ever, the radiator hissing, the walls pressing close. My phone rang, slicing through the silence. Mom's name lit the screen. I stared for a moment before swiping to answer. Her voice was tight, urgent. Hannah, the mortgage payment didn't go through. The bank keeps calling. They said there will be late fees, maybe worse. What happened? Did you forget? A bitter laugh slipped from me, though it sounded more like a crack. I didn't forget, Mom. I canceled it. There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end. What do you mean you canceled it? You can't just... I cut in, my tone flat. I can, and I did. It is not my responsibility anymore. Her voice lowered, frantic. We don't have time for this today. This is your sister's wedding. Please just take care of it and we'll talk later. I let the silence stretch, the years of carrying them pressing heavy in my chest. Then I said quietly, I'll bring a gift. Before she could respond, I ended the call. I walked to the closet, pulled the blue binder from the shelf and tucked it into my bag. Its edges stuck out like a blade, rough under my fingers. I sat on the edge of the bed for a long moment, staring at the floor, my heart pounding. Beneath the nerves was something steady, almost calm. By the time I stepped outside, the snow had stopped. The streets of Chicago were wet, shining under the gray winter light. I hailed a cab instead of taking the train. I didn't trust myself not to turn back if I gave myself too much time to think. The ride to the Hilton on Michigan Avenue felt endless. Traffic crawled, horns blared, the driver muttered under his breath, but all I could hear was my own pulse in my ears. My hand rested on the binder in my lap as if it could anchor me. The hotel loomed glassy and tall, its entrance crowded with black cars and guests in coats and gowns. I paid the fare, pulled my coat tighter, and walked past the doorman holding open the gold-trimmed doors. The lobby glowed with chandeliers, laughter spilling down the hallway from the ballroom. I could already picture the long tables draped in white, the towering cake, the champagne flutes lined up. At the head table, the family chairs, one of them left empty, waiting, though they would rather it stayed that way. I tightened my grip on the binder and moved down the hall. The music grew louder, cheerful strings and piano spilling through the air. My chest ached, but my steps didn't falter. I had promised I would bring a gift, and I intended to deliver it. At the door of the ballroom, I paused, straightened my shoulders, and pushed it open. The warmth and noise hit me like a wave. Conversations faltered, heads turned as I stepped inside. No one had expected me. I walked past the rows of tables, heels clicking against the polished floor, my eyes locked on the towering cake in the corner. 5 tiers of fondant and sugar flowers. I set the binder down beside it with a solid thud, the sound louder than it should have been. My hands no longer shook. $45,800, I said clearly, my voice carrying across the room. That's what I've covered for this family. Hospital bills, utilities, internet, Emily's rent, her credit cards, her flights. I've carried all of it, but today I am not your bank anymore. A gasp rippled through the crowd. Emily's smile froze, her hand tightening on her champagne glass. What are you doing? She hissed, her face flushing crimson. You can't come here and ruin my wedding. I shook my head. I'm not ruining it. I'm showing the truth. Daniel looked from me to Emily, his brow furrowed. What is she talking about? Emily let out a brittle laugh. She's exaggerating, Daniel. You know how she island, always dramatic, always looking for attention. I opened the binder and pulled out a clear sleeve stuffed with papers. Screenshots of text messages, bank transfers, all highlighted in yellow. I laid them on the table, the plastic crinkling. These are your messages, Emily. Every promise you never kept. Whispers spread through the guests. Some leaned forward, others exchanged glances. Daniel's hand trembled around his glass. Stop it, Emily snapped, her voice rising. You are jealous. That is all. You have always been jealous of me. The words hit, but I stood taller. Jealous of what? The Lexus Dad brags about. The wedding you couldn't pay for without borrowing. I have been invisible in this family for years, and all the while I was the one keeping the lights on. Daniel's glass slipped from his hand and shattered on the floor. The room went still. He stared at Emily, jaw tight, eyes wide, as if seeing her for the first time. The silence pressed down heavy, hundreds of eyes fixed on us. I felt my pulse in my throat, but my voice stayed steady. I've carried this family long enough. Tonight I set it down. No one moved. No one spoke. For the first time in years, I was not the shadow in the background. I was standing in the light, the truth spilling out, where no one could ignore it. Emily's face flushed bright red, her bouquet trembling in her hand as if she might throw it at me. "You ruined everything," she screamed, her voice cracking under the weight of the room. "Do you even realize what you have done? This was supposed to be my perfect day." The chatter rose, guests shifting in their seats, some whispering, others staring openly. Mom pressed a napkin to her mouth, tears streaking down her cheeks. "Hannah, how could you do this?" she pleaded, her voice breaking. "Not here, not today." I kept my eyes on Emily. I did not need to raise my voice, every word cut sharper for being calm. "I didn't ruin your day. I stopped lying for you." The band in the corner had gone silent. Silverware clattered as someone dropped a fork, the sound ringing through the stillness. Daniel stood frozen, his gaze locked on the stack of papers I had laid down. He reached for one, his hand shaking. He read the highlighted text messages, his lips moving silently, as if the words burned. He looked up at Emily, and for the first time I saw doubt in his eyes. Emily lunged forward, grabbing at the binder. "Stop it," she shouted, her mascara streaking down her face. "You are pathetic, jealous, bitter. You always have been." I pulled the binder back against my chest. "Enough, Emily." A chair scraped loudly against the floor. Aunt Maggie, her gray hair pinned neatly, stood tall at the far end of the table. Her voice was steady, though her hands trembled. "That's enough, Emily. If it weren't for Hannah, this family would have fallen apart years ago. Do any of you even realize what she has given up?" The room fell into another hush. Some guests stared at Maggie, others at me. Emily spun toward her, eyes wild. "Stay out of this. You don't know anything." But Maggie didn't sit down. She looked directly at my parents. "She has been paying your bills, hasn't she? Covering your debts. And you let her do it while you praised Emily. Shame on you." Mom sobbed harder, shaking her head. "That's not how it is," she whispered, but her voice lacked conviction. Dad sat slumped, hands clasped tightly, eyes fixed on the table. He didn't deny it. Daniel stepped back from Emily. His expression was unreadable, but the distance between them was unmistakable. He didn't reach for her hand. He didn't move closer. He simply stood there, shoulders stiff, his eyes still on me. The guests began to murmur again, louder, now pieces of conversation floating across the ballroom. I had no idea. She paid that much. Unbelievable. Some rose from their chairs, collecting coats, slipping quietly toward the side doors. The fairy tale had cracked wide open. Emily's voice cut through the noise, shrill and raw. "You are jealous of me. You couldn't stand to see me happy, so you came here to destroy me." She jabbed a finger toward me, her whole body trembling. "You ruined my wedding." I felt the sting of her words, but they no longer sank into me like they once had. I straightened my shoulders, clutching the binder to my side. "I didn't ruin anything. I set myself free." Mom reached across the table as if she could pull the words back. "Hannah, please don't do this." But it was already done. Emily dropped into her chair, her perfect dress crumpling, as she sobbed, her makeup smeared. Daniel turned away from her, jaw tight, then strode toward the side exit without a word. His polished shoes echoed against the marble floor. Emily shot up, calling his name, but he didn't look back. The ballroom erupted into chaos. Relatives huddled together, whispering urgently. A few guests gathered near the doors, shaking their heads. Mom collapsed into Dad's shoulder, sobbing while he sat frozen, his face pale, his silence heavier than anything he might have said. I slid the binder back into my bag and looked around one last time. Faces met mine, some with pity, others with shame, but none with the blind adoration they once gave to Emily. I turned on my heel, the sound of my footsteps echoing across the room. The chatter swelled behind me, voices rising in confusion and disbelief. I didn't glance back at the head table or the flowers tied to Emily's chair. When I reached the ballroom doors, I paused for a moment, hand resting on the brass handle. The noise of the room pressed against my back, but I kept my eyes forward. Then I pushed the door open and stepped into the quiet corridor. The hallway was dim compared to the glittering chaos I had left behind. My heart pounded my chest tight, but my steps were steady. For the first time in years, I felt taller. I walked down the corridor past the mirrors and the chandeliers, each step carrying me further from the noise, closer to the silence I had claimed as my own. I reached the lobby, where the chandeliers glowed warm, and guests' laughter spilled from other ballrooms, unaware of the storm upstairs. The contrast felt jarring. I pulled my coat tighter, crossed the marble floor, and stepped out into the cold Chicago night. Snow flurries danced in the air, the city humming faintly in the distance. I drew in a deep breath, the cold biting at my lungs, and let it out slowly. My hands still trembled, but not from fear, from release. I walked toward Michigan Avenue, the sound of traffic mixing with the crunch of snow under my boots. My phone buzzed in my pocket, vibrating again and again, but I didn't pull it out. For once, I didn't feel the need to answer. I woke the next morning to a pale winter sun spilling through the blinds, the apartment quiet, except for the hum of the radiator. For a few moments I lay still, wondering if the night before had been a dream. Then my phone lit up on the nightstand, notifications stacked one on top of the other. Facebook, Instagram, even LinkedIn. Emily's wedding was everywhere, but so was my name. I sat up slowly and opened one of the posts. The photo showed Emily in her gown, the ballroom behind her glittering with lights. The comments, though, were not the adoring chorus she was used to. Beautiful dress, someone had written, but did you hear what her sister said? Another had typed bluntly, family money doesn't mean your sister's money. Do better. My stomach twisted as I scrolled. Friends of hers who once flooded her page with hearts were quiet. A few of my cousins had chimed in, saying outright what no one had dared to before. If it weren't for Hannah, the Coopers would have lost the house. I set the phone down, pressing my hands to my face. Strangely, there was no rush of triumph, no sweetness in seeing her pedestal crack. What I felt was lighter, as if the weight pressing on my chest had finally shifted. By the afternoon, a coworker texted me, "Hannah, did you see what's happening at Emily's firm?" Attached was a screenshot of a LinkedIn thread. Colleagues at her marketing agency were questioning her credibility. One even hinted that she might lose their biggest client after the public spectacle. I stared at the screen, exhaling slowly. Actions had consequences, and this time the consequences weren't mine to shoulder. I opened my laptop at the kitchen table, the same spot where I had once tallied every bill and every sacrifice. The blue binder sat nearby, closed, but heavy like a witness. I typed University of Chicago Booth MBA into the search bar and pulled up the application portal. My fingers hovered above the keys, my heart hammering. Grace's words echoed in my mind. Boundaries are love with a backbone. Line by line, I began filling out the application, the cursor blinking like a heartbeat. Name, address, employment history. Each entry felt like carving out a piece of ground that was finally mine. When I hit submit, the confirmation email landed in my inbox. My chest ached, but it was an ache closer to hope than pain. Later, I opened my banking app. For years, I had kept an envelope tucked away in a drawer labeled Family Emergencies. Hundreds here, sometimes 1,000 there, saved for the inevitable late-night call from Mom or the next rent shortfall from Emily. Now the envelope was empty, its purpose finished. I transferred what remained into a new account and labeled it Aurora Trip. In the notes I typed Iceland Northern Lights. The number was small, just a few hundred, but it was mine. Not for bills, not for rescues. For me. As I hit confirm, a warmth spread through me. I leaned back, staring at the Chicago skyline, glowing faintly against the darkening sky. For the first time in years, the sound of my phone buzzing didn't make me flinch. It didn't matter who was calling. That money, that dream, that future was untouchable. I turned off the lamp and sat in the dim light of the room, the glow of the screensaver dancing across the wall. My hands rested loosely in my lap. The apartment no longer felt like a cage. It felt like a beginning. The following week, I received an email from Booth Admissions inviting me for an interview. I read it 3 times before I could believe it. I printed the letter and pinned it to the corkboard above my desk, next to the small jar labeled Aurora Trip. At work, Grace stopped by my cubicle. She noticed the faint smile I couldn't hide. "Something changed," she said knowingly. I nodded. I applied. She grinned, her eyes warm. "Good. About time." When I got home that night, I made a simple dinner of pasta and roasted vegetables. I sat by the window bowl in my hands, watching the snowdrift past the streetlights. For the first time, the silence didn't ache. It soothed. My phone buzzed on the counter. Mom's name. Then Dad's. Then Emily's. I let it ring until it stopped. Then I picked it up, opened a new contact folder, and typed Aurora Trip, adding the savings account number as if it were a person I wanted to protect. In a way it was. It was the version of me I had almost lost. I set the phone down and took another bite of pasta, savoring the quiet. The city hummed faintly outside, alive and indifferent. I smiled faintly, realizing that for the first time in years, I wasn't waiting for anyone else to see me. I was finally seeing myself. A year later, winter had returned to Chicago, the kind that dusted the city in white and muffled the noise outside my Lakeview apartment. I sat curled in my armchair with a mug of hot cocoa, warming my hands, the skyline flickering faintly through the frosted glass. On the table beside me, my phone buzzed. For a long moment, I let it ring. Old habits die hard, and every vibration still stirred a familiar memory. But this time, the name on the screen made me pause. "Dad," I answered slowly, pressing the phone to my ear. His voice was rough, hesitant. "Hannah, it is me." Silence stretched between us, filled with years of words never spoken. Finally, he sighed, heavy and worn. "You saved this family more times than I can count. Paid bills I should have paid, carried burdens that weren't yours. And I never thanked you. Not once. I was wrong." The words felt foreign, fragile, like hearing a language I had never known I needed. My eyes stung and I gripped the mug tighter against my chest. "You don't have to be perfect, Dad," I said softly. "I just need respect." His throat cleared thick with emotion. "You deserve more than that. I hope one day we can try again." After we hung up, I sat in the quiet, the city humming faintly outside. For years, I had carried the weight of being unseen, unheard, reduced to nothing but a source of money. Now, even if the apology had come late, it loosened something inside me. Mom's texts had grown sparse over the months. No more demands, no more sharp reminders. Just simple words like "How are you?" or "Hope you are well." Emily had gone quiet altogether. I hadn't seen her since the wedding, though word filtered through relatives. She had been humbled, her shine dimmed, her job no longer secure. I didn't need details. The silence was enough. I rose from the chair and walked to the window, pressing my palm against the cold glass. Thousands of lights stretched across the city, each one proof that life moved forward no matter who was watching. For the first time, I felt I could simply stand still and not be left behind. On the counter, pinned neatly on the corkboard, was my acceptance letter from Booth. Next to it sat the jar labeled Aurora Trip, now fuller than I had ever expected. Every time I slipped a 20 into it, I imagined the northern lights sweeping across a dark Icelandic sky. It was not about the money anymore. It was about the promise. I thought of the girl I used to be sitting at family dinners with, her achievements swallowed whole by silence. The young woman who wired money in the middle of the night, hoping one day someone would notice. The sister who was called dramatic whenever she tried to speak. She had lived in the shadows of others, but she had also survived them. And now she was free. I returned to the armchair, curling beneath a blanket, the warmth of the cocoa fading in my hands. My chest felt lighter than it had in years, steady in a way I had once thought impossible. Family, I realized, can be love, but only if it is built on respect. Without it, it is nothing but a debt you will never finish paying. Real love does not come with an invoice. Real love does not vanish the moment you stop covering someone else's bills. Real love has boundaries. I set the mug down, breathed in deep, and allowed myself a small smile. If you have ever felt like the wallet of your family carrying weight no one thanks you for, I hope my story reminded you that you are not alone. Tell me in the comments if you have ever faced something similar, and do not forget to like and subscribe so you can hear more stories like mine. Sometimes sharing the truth is the first step to finding freedom.